India, of course, is waiting and anticipating and going to host all G20 nations, their prime ministers, their president, their head of state, and all of that is going to happen on 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th of September here in the national capital. A lot is on the agenda, a lot will be discussed, but importantly on the economic agenda, what could be the biggest points that India would be in fact putting in front of these G20 countries? What would India be hoping to bargain for? And the other way around, what could other countries be hoping India will bargain for, India should be pushed back on? What's on the economic agenda?
So, a lot, Shweta. I think number one, it is, of course, a great global headline event,
yes,
right? And we are playing host to the 20 largest, most powerful economies of the world, right? Now, this comes at a time when India, of course, is in the run-up to election season, and there is no doubt that India will want to stamp its presence as a large economic power which cannot be ignored when it comes to any decision making in the geopolitical, geo-economic hemisphere. Right. Now, we'll come to what India should push for and what India may perhaps be pushed to the wall for. But I think right now the environment in Delhi NCR is also quite interesting. In
Absolutely.
fact, I had driven down to Agra and back over the weekend, and it's not just Delhi NCR. Even a city like Agra has got these lovely statues running across the metro line of various yoga asanas, of the various yoga poses, all nicely wrapped up, covered up, I think waiting to be unveiled just ahead of the G20 Summit. And we are likely to expect a lot of dignitaries traveling to Agra to see the Taj Mahal. But I think coming back to Delhi NCR, it almost reminds you of of inspections that used to happen in schools. That there is new Geru Chuna happening on roads, on flower pots, on trees. So in fact, in Noida, if you look at if you drive past Noida, you'll see it's not just that lovely tricolored lighting,
Absolutely,
which has been there for almost a year or so now. I think it came around Diwali last year and has continued to be there. You've also seen trees being illuminated. So there are these lovely little lights, blue colored washes on trees, and in addition to that, you've also got painting happening on trees. So you've got nice artisanal work happening on the barks of trees. And there, as you can see, I think the visual suggesting this sort of run up to
last minute
planning and going and seeing what is really in store. How is the decoration and the decking up of NCR happening? How are the traffic situation likely to get managed? What is the upkeep when it comes to very prominent areas which are likely to be visited by G20 leaders? But I think if we come back to the core of what really defines or should define India's presidency and how India should go down in history when we talk about G20, I think it's important to look at number one, what should India push for? What is it that India definitely needs the world to understand and appreciate when it comes to G20? Number one, of course, Prime Minister Modi also said over the weekend that inflation is a global issue.
Absolutely.
Inflation is an issue which the whole world is grappling with today. So what is critical right now when it comes to inflation specifically is creation of alternate supply chains. So it's very important that the dependence on certain regions, certain blocks is no longer the case. You've got to have enough and more options for the global supply chain to kick in and tame inflation as and when a situation like that arises. We've seen how we got impacted during COVID zero lockdown when China's zero COVID implementation, the policy, and we'd seen how factories across China had shut down and how trade from and to China had reduced, and that led to the first impact of inflation in the West. And thereafter you saw the Russia-Ukraine war. So your wheat exports, your oil import, export, all of that took a massive beating because of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. So number one on India's agenda to push the world towards has to be diversification of global supply chains. Add to that, and very closely linked, India has to steer away from this broad nomenclature of China plus one. I think that identity of plus one and plus one equal to India does not cut it today. We've seen how India has been able to get out of the shackles of COVID and how China has receded further down. So it's a clear contrast of progression versus recession or regression, right? So here we should not be seen in the same light as a regression driven China and India being, you know, a preferred or a by default +1. I think the entire narrative has to change to China +1 being replaced with India plus emerging markets. And when we talk about emerging markets, that is where this whole story of the Global South emerges. And Global South is something that Prime Minister Modi and other state heads, even at the BRICS summit, were really, really big upon, that there has to be this emergence of the Global South, led of course by India, but inclusion needs to translate beyond the immediate subcontinent of India, China, perhaps Bangladesh, and even beyond into perhaps pockets of the ASEAN region.
Right.
This includes of course, you know, and beyond ASEAN as well. So Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, these are emerging blocks which are very likely to have their breakthrough sometime in this decade. So I think that China +1 has to be replaced by India plus emerging markets. Within these emerging markets, certain African nations and the southeastern nations need to be a clear-cut emerging market, new definition of the emerging market stack, where India is a front runner and supported by as and where you find the right resources, the right skills, the right expertise, supported by the Global South. So Global South becoming a very, very potent economic bloc is something that India needs to walk the talk on. And I think it can be impressed upon during this global meet, which is likely to happen on 8th, 9th and 10th of September.
And add to that the new frontiers, the new challenges that come by the way of cryptocurrency and AI, both of which are in a way untamed sort of resources that India and other developing economies and developed economies must utilize on, must bank on. But how do you do that without an actual real framework in place? So that of course is going to be another issue that India will be pushing. Should be.
I think, you know, emerging technologies, new technologies, India in any case has been at the forefront of any IT-led innovations. Now, whether you talk about the back-end services, which the likes of TCS, Infosys, Wipro, HCL, Tech have offered to the world, or when it comes to core product developments, new innovations in the startup space. So you talk about fintech, you talk about quick commerce, you talk about food delivery aggregation, you talk about, you know, having a very, very clear man-to-man marking when it comes to an Amazon being head-on with a Flipkart or an Uber being head-on with an Ola. So India has been at the forefront of either developing new technologies or quickly being able to better existing technologies and create a market of their own.
And a framework.
So when it comes to AI and crypto, which you mentioned, again, these are very, very new technologies out there in the world. And it is going to be imperative for AI to have some sort of a regulation. By regulation, I don't intend to say that regulation has to cede enough control to the government to be able to shut off the taps as and when required. But basically, what gets generated with Gen AI, how do copyright issues get tackled, and how do you ensure that you don't land up in a situation where AI is taking autonomous calls without a real sane human mind being able to tame it or control it. So AI being one. Second, of course, cryptocurrencies. I think India has been very quick to shun cryptocurrencies, unlike the rest of the world. So the West has still been able to make a use case for cryptocurrencies. India has been able to create a disuse case for cryptocurrencies, right? So again, who regulates crypto? What are the use cases for crypto? Where should crypto be accepted? Is it a financial asset? Is it a monetary asset? All of those cases need to get sort of, you know, included in a global framework.
Right.
And that global framework, by way of some sort of regulation or some sort of deeper creation of a framework for cryptocurrencies, is something that India should do.
Perhaps should be on agenda. We don't know if it is on agenda just as yet, but there are of course challenges on which India will be pushed, and one of a few of those challenges emerging recently, where we are looking at news reports that Trump, the US president, was going to visit India.
US president.
US president, but Biden,
yeah.
I beg your pardon, who's going to visit India, will of course be pushing India on relooking its import curbs on laptops, palm tops, camera phones, and all of that of course has been in agenda for a while, because we've had US spokespersons earlier as well coming on record talking about how that import ban hurts many US based companies in India, including Dell. But HP, of course, looking to now find local partners. But that, of course, could be on agenda.
Of course, Shweta. So, I think there is going to be some pressure for India to withdraw or amend or add some flexibility to the various import and export curbs that India has implemented. Of course, the import curbs on laptops, tablets, PCs, cameras, etc. are likely to impact China more than it is likely to impact US. But then again, in US, the pressure that could come on India would be that when you create these alternate supply chains, and even if you want to block trade coming in from China, because you don't want the Chinese economy to grow at a clip faster than yours, and that is when you will assert your position at the global head table. I think what is important to note is that by way of these laptop import curbs, we are looking at more US based companies setting up manufacturing plants in India. And the world will want to push that against India and say that no, let us continue to operate whichever geography we find more value in, and hence you need to be flexible on your import norms, right? But I think it is important for India in equal measure to also push for the fact that there is PLI, there are incentives which are going to help manufacturers take advantage of the various schemes available in India. And we've already seen 40 laptop makers globally sign up for the PLI scheme last week. So that is a list of 40. 40 companies have shown interest, but not all 40 of them will possibly start manufacturing immediately. But we have reason to believe that at least a good 25-30% of them will see some action when it comes to manufacturing. But US will want to, President Biden will want to push India to the wall and say that, hey, ease your laptop import curbs, because there are US based brands like HP, Dell, etc., which will directly get impacted with this ban.
Absolutely, and not just import curb, but also export curb. Export curb, especially on rice, because that's been a bone of contention for many countries which were hoping to export. India being the second largest exporter of rice in the world has impacted a lot of people who are hoping to get rice at a minimal cheap rate perhaps, but those export curbs would also be perhaps renegotiated. Many countries would like to push for that.
Again, I think there would be pressure on India to relook at the rice export ban. India was a little flexible last week. We saw countries like Bhutan, Singapore and UAE, if I'm not mistaken, where India opened up the supply lines when it came to export of rice. But there are accusations on India that India has now in fact led to food inflation in other parts of the world, including the UK. Right. So India being different estimates suggest between 40% to 60% of the rice basket of the world, and all the rice, that at least half the rice that the world eats actually goes from India, and India closing the tap on that is sure to have a direct price impact on those countries and their food baskets. So so there is going to be pressure on India to open rice exports. But then again, like I often mention, it's important to take that analogy of when you're traveling in an aircraft. You've got to wear your oxygen mask first before assisting others. So you have got to keep your inflation in control, the welfare of your citizens first, before you open doors of exports to the rest of the world.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because a lot of Western media at this point in time is also accusing India, as you rightly said, of exporting food inflation to the rest of the world. Obviously, India has responded to that appropriately by the same analogy that we've got to protect our own interests first. We've got to tame our own food inflation first before we can help you. And rice export or curbs on rice exports are helping us do that. There could perhaps be a relook at it in the near future, but not happening anytime soon.
We live in an interconnected world, Shweta. Just as India is seemingly exporting food inflation, India is also importing inflation when the OPEC decides to increase oil prices.
That is correct.
Right? So that has a direct bearing on fuel prices. That has a direct bearing on supply chain. So I think in an interconnected world that we live in, every country, even OPEC, why is OPEC cutting oil production? OPEC is cutting oil production because it wants oil prices to stabilize at a higher price, right? So India is looking at exporting rice simply because India wants the price equilibrium between rice being sold and rice being bought in India to meet at a point which is lower on the price graph. Right. So overall, I think in an interconnected world, these challenges are going to be there. But I think what is also important for India to push for is definitely going to be the UPI story, is definitely going to be the India stack story, the digital public goods, public infrastructure goods, right? So I think that is one big story which India has been able to outshine the rest of the world, and it is important for India to show the G20 leaders how easy it is to scan and pay and move on in life. And the India stack, the whole architecture
some
on
of the
which
visiting
these
leaders
payments
are already
rest.
in awe of how fast it is. I mean, we've seen pictures of that, we've seen videos of that. Some of the visiting leaders in the past couple of months are already in awe of how quickly you can buy things in India. You just have to scan and pay.
Exactly. And the entire architecture on which this rests, the India stack, I think that's again a massive story. And the timing, I think, for G20 is
couldn't be
even
better.
more right now, not just with UPI India stack, but with Chandrayaan 3. The success,
of
I mean,
India's
still
space mission.
early days perhaps, but I think very easy to still say that it has been more of a success than any other space mission to the dark side of the moon by any other country. So in that sense, India has been fairly successful in Chandrayaan 3. There is renewed interest in the space tech sector, in India's startups and private sector which are now open to space exploration. I think any sort of investment coming into that sector, into space tech, into further honing the entire space exploration space, and even as we speak, you know, our sun exploration mission is underway.
Absolutely.
So you've got the Aditya actually heading to L1 to actually optimize the gravity of the Earth and the Sun, where its fuel burn is going to be next to nil, almost zero, and it continues to orbit around the Earth while getting a clear view of the Sun. And that is likely to start transmitting about 4 months from now. So I think the whole space sector is very hot right now. And the timing for G20 Summit culmination here in India could not have been any better.
Absolutely. The G20 culmination in just about a couple of days from now, 4th of September, 7th of September onward. It begins in the national capital. There's a lot on the agenda, but remember, as we discussed, preparations, of course, in full swing as India prepares to host leaders of the G20 nations. We will, of course, keep bringing you all those details. But with that, it's a wrap on this bulletin. Thanks for watching.